Hello everyone, namaste. It's so nice to be able to have this special occasion. It's a beautiful, beautiful time, very meaningful for not only those of us who are part of Ananda and Nanda Sangha, but also it's meaningful for the world, and I hope we can help convey that. Devi ji and I arrived just 4 days back in India, and we feel so happy to be here again. I think we'll be seeing many of you in person, not just over the video stream, but we look very much forward to the upcoming programs and to greeting and seeing all of you. So many of you are our dear friends.
And we want this evening to be rather informal. Jyotish and I will just be sharing stories of our time with Swami Kriyananda for more than 40 years. And he came to India at the end of his life when his physical body wasn't that strong, but his spirit was always strong. But the remarkable energy and joy and enthusiasm with which he approached life are well worth talking about. And we also want to say hello. This is our first live streaming here from India. We've been, as many of you know and have joined us, we've been having our monthly satsangs from America, from Ananda Ashram there in Northern California. But it's nice to be doing one a little closer to home for all of you here in India. So we're very happy to be back. And this, what more appropriate time to begin sharing with you all again than the anniversary of when Swami Kriyananda met our great guru Paramahansa Yogananda. So Jyotish, you had a fun way you wanted to share.
I have a fun way to share tonight. So we want to share tonight, as Devi said, very informally. And we want to do it not only about Swami, but even in the manner in which Swami would do this. And so you might notice that we have a cup of tea. Swamiji would often talk to us, and he would have a cup of tea, and he would pause, take a swallow, and then go on. So in that manner, we want to try to help all of us tune in to not only what happened in Swamiji's life, but how it happened, but even more importantly, the consciousness and the vibration of that. So, as Devi said, I had an idea of how to begin us on this journey, and so I would like all of us in our imaginations to go back now to 1948. This is the time that Swami met Master. But let's start a week or 2 weeks before that. So it's the end of the summer, the end of August, the beginning of September, and it's 1948. And Swami Kriyananda had been in New York City because he had the idea, his youth, and especially now with a gathering momentum, he had been having almost a desperate search for truth. At that time, he didn't define that as a search for God. In fact, only a year before this all took place, he would have rejected the mere fact of God at all. But then he began reading, and finally he read a short section from the Bhagavad Gita, and that really resonated with his soul. So here we are now at the beginning of September in 1948. Swami is in New York because he's thinking, maybe I'll find work as a merchant marine, and that will give me plenty of time away from the hustle and bustle, and I'll be out at sea with time to study and save money so I can go off and become a hermit. Just at that time, his parents have shifted to Egypt. His father is stationed there as a geologist, and he's just put his mother on a boat. And so we're in New York on Fifth Avenue, And it's a warm beginning of September. And he goes into a bookstore and he's looking for books on Indian philosophy. And he sees a grouping of books that is a pretty good collection. He sees something on the Gita, he sees some philosophy. And during that time, face out, there's a book with a beautiful picture of somebody that seems very attractive to Swamiji. And he looks at that book and he's very attracted to it. And the name of that book is Autobiography of a Yogi. And so he opens that book and begins to look through. I must say, having spent 50 years with Swamiji, he was always going to bookstores, always picking up books, always paging through with interest. It was a lifelong habit. But here we are back in 1948, and he pages through, and he looks, and he sees that it's dedicated to Luther Burbank, an American saint. And Swami thinks, how could there be a saint in this materialistic country? And he puts the book back on the shelf. And he ends up buying a nice, beautiful translation of the Bhagavad Gita by Sir Edwin Arnold. And then he leaves the bookstore and he begins walking down the street. And all of a sudden, it's as if there's a force that is turning him around and forcing him to go back to that bookstore. And it's something that is very mysterious, but very powerful. And so he rushes back to the bookstore, knowing that it's the attraction of that man's face and that book. And he buys that book, and then he begins reading the book. And he describes it as, I was caught up in weeping half the time and laughing half the time, weeping tears of joy and laughing at the fact that I've finally found what I've been searching for all this time. And he reads it straight through. And in 3 or 4 days, then he says goodbye to his godparents. And the next day he gets the first bus he can across country from New York to California, because that's where Yogananda is living. And it takes him 4 days and 4 nights. And so now the time has passed, and it's probably at this time about September 10th. And he arrives in California exhausted. And so he spends a night at a hotel near the bus station where he arrives. And then, seeing that Yogananda was living in Encinitas, as he imagines, he takes a bus to Encinitas to see if he can meet with Yogananda. And he comes to the door of the hermitage there, and he knocks on the door, and he's wearing a kind of a white suit with a white hat, because in Cuba it's called a Palm Beach or a Panama suit, and so he thinks that's what people wear in California. Well, they don't, of course, even in those times. So he comes to the door in this rather bizarre outfit, knocks on the door, and this woman comes, who's an elderly woman, asks him what he wants, and he pauses a little bit and says, I came to see Paramahansa Yogananda. He doesn't even know how to pronounce the name. And she thinks, oh, seeing this strange man in this strange outfit, she says, oh, have you come to check the water meter? Thinking that he's some serviceman. He says, no, I've come to see Paramahansa Yogananda. She said, well, he's not here. He's lecturing in Hollywood. And Swami has no idea that there's anything in Hollywood. He thinks it's only movie stars and movie studios and so on. But he then gets on a bus, and he asks this woman, how soon can I meet Yogananda? And she says, well, first, of course, you have to study the lessons. He has no idea there are any lessons to be studied. He asks, how long will that take? She said, 4 years or so. And he's just stricken with the idea that he has to wait all this time. So he gets on a bus rather hurriedly, and he's thinking, this is just, the kind of old lady that gets around churches. But then he pauses, and he remembers this woman's eyes. Turns out, he later finds out, this is the most advanced woman disciple of all the women disciples of Yogananda, a very high soul named Gyanamata. But he doesn't know it at this time. But as he's going up to Hollywood on the bus, he remembers her eyes. And he said, there was something deep in those eyes. They were very calm, and there was deep wisdom in them. And remembering that, in his heart, he realizes that this judgmental attitude that he had of her being just an old lady, he apologizes inwardly. And when he does that, somehow in his heart, he feels that he's going to be accepted. And so then he proceeds up, and after some difficulty, he's told that he can't possibly see Yogananda that day. And then he's told that he will have to wait some months, and he finally resolves, well, maybe I'm not ready. And as he resolves that, the woman who's the secretary said, let me go ask the master if he will meet with you. And she goes and asks him, and she said, yes, the master will greet you now. Now, we're going to do something else that is part of what Swami did with us many, many, many times. Swami would constantly be writing. And when he would write some fresh new chapter or a fresh new essay, he would say, gather us together and say, let me read to you what I've just written. So Devi, as you know, we write a weekly blog. Devi has just finished a few hours ago the weekly blog for this week. And so in the manner of Swami, I'm going to sit back and sip my tea while Devi reads to you the very latest writings, not even off the press yet, fresh, in this case, out of the iPad.
And so this will be distributed through email and so forth on Friday, but you're the first ones to get to hear it. So I just wrote this morning, and you'll see why we want to share it, because it's about Swami's anniversary. The title is The Secret of a Remarkable Life. Today is September 12, 2017, the 69th anniversary of when a young man knelt alone at the feet of his guru, Paramahansa Yogananda. With his heart aching with divine longing, the 22-year-old James Donald Walters said beseechingly, I want to be your disciple. The guru paused and then replied, you have good karma. You may join us. Later at that first meeting, Yogananda said, I give you my unconditional love. And the remainder of the man's life was shaped by the consciousness of this great yogi. From that moment forward, lives throughout the world were also destined to be changed, as Yogananda began the transformation of his young disciple into the remarkable spiritual teacher, Swami Kriyananda. Recently, while at Ananda Assisi, we watched this touching first meeting as it was beautifully portrayed in the film The Answer. This film, written by Swamiji, is a dramatic reenaction of his boyhood search for truth, the predestined meeting in 1948 with his guru, and his years of training at Yoganandaji's feet until the master passed in 1952. The Answer has already won nearly 30 awards at film festivals throughout the world, and will be released internationally in spring 2018. But the spiritual power of the movie radiates from the depiction of the guru-disciple relationship, opening the eyes of the viewers to the depth of care, wisdom, and love upon which this bond rests. To bring about Swami's inner transformation, Yogananda guided him in many things over the years. He said, "You are too intellectual. You must get devotion." And so Swami poured himself into chanting and devotional practices until one day the master said, "Look how I've changed Walter." This was the name Yogananda always called him. Master placed him in charge of the monks, even though he was both young and new to the work. Under Master's guidance, he organized the monks into a disciplined and dynamic order. He enthusiastically poured his heart into everything that Yogananda asked of him, and more than fulfilled his guru's expectations. He gave of himself completely, without any hesitation, reflecting the unconditional love that he had received and which he returned in full measure. Towards the end of Yogananda's life, he made 3 significant statements to Kriyananda about what lay ahead. First, he said by means of instruction, "Your work in this lifetime is writing, editing, and lecturing." This Swami fulfilled, leaving a prodigious legacy of books, music, and recorded talks. On another occasion, Yogananda said prophetically, "You have a great work to do." This too he has accomplished in creating the ever-expanding Ananda Sangha and spiritual communities which share Yogananda's vibrations and teachings worldwide. Finally, just days before his passing, Yogananda said to him lovingly, "You have pleased me very much. I want you to know that." These words gave Swami the reassurance and strength to fulfill everything his guru had asked of him, and became his guiding light through many obstacles that lay ahead. So what is the secret of Swamiji's remarkable life? It's the constant flow of grace, born of total self-offering and unconditional love. And what can we learn from his example? Few of us will leave such a rich legacy in service to our Guru, but we too can offer every ounce of what we have to give. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, "I accept even a leaf if offered with devotion. No gift offered lovingly to God is too small or insignificant, and when we join our offerings together, our many hands can make miracles." Swami Kriyananda once said of Ananda, "We are part of a great tide of joyful, loving energy that wants to give and give as long as people are happy to receive it." Thank you, Swamiji, for your life, and happy spiritual anniversary.
So that's, as I said, a remembrance, an echo of just what Swami would do on an occasion like this.
But then he would also say, "So how did you all like it?"
Yes, how did you all like it? So we hope you did like it. I liked it. We thought now what we would do is talk about the time that Swami was with Master. It was 3.5 years, and some of the very important elements of the training that he received from Master, and then how those elements were part of the, one might call them part of the DNA of the work of Ananda Sangha and the communities that he founded. Because Swami, during those times, was shaped by the consciousness of Yogananda. As Devi was saying, he opened himself very deeply, very completely to the influence and the training of Yogananda. And in doing that, Yogananda was able to shape and mold the consciousness and the activities of Swami, and that push allowed him to do this work, this great work that he had to do in the future. So I'll talk about an element or two, and then Devi will pick one. But I think the first and most important element, because this is what Swami Kriyananda himself said was most important, was the consciousness of discipleship. He, at that time, decided that whatever Yogananda said, he would do. Whatever Yogananda said, he would accept. Sometimes he would hear kind of outrageous things. You know how people are. We get together and we talk, and somebody says, oh, there are lots of flying saucers. And Swami would say, did Master say that? And if somebody would then reply in the affirmative, yes, Master said it, then Swami would accept it. So, well, since I've mentioned flying saucers, that came up, in fact. And somebody said, oh, there are aliens in lots of different places. And Swami said, did Master say that? And they said, yes. In fact, Master said that the way God has created this universe, there's life everywhere. Even in the center of stars, there's life and there's consciousness. This universe is made out of consciousness. And so consciousness produces life, so there's life everywhere. So we're not alone in this universe. But I'm getting off the point here. The point that I wanted to make is Swami's complete adherence in a sense of discipleship to Yogananda. And this became stronger and stronger. Sometimes, you know, if you're in the presence of a great soul and you're magnetized by that great soul, then it's almost as if you get in tune for that period of time. But then when Yogananda passed, many of the disciples ended up then leaving. And Swami, of course, didn't. But the consciousness didn't hold him in place anymore. It had to be something internal that he did. But over the years, he grew deeper and deeper in his discipleship. As Devi said, he wrote a myriad of books and hundreds of pieces of music and did all this vast, enormous work on the behalf of his guru. But the way he defined himself was, I want to be known as being a good disciple. One time he said that it wasn't enough to think in terms of, I want my thoughts to be in tune with Master. He did that for a long time, meaning that he would ask on a daily basis, is this in tune? When he was going to begin something, he would say, is this in tune in his mind? And feel Master's response. But then one time he said, I realized that just having my thoughts in tune with Master was not enough. He said, I wanted my thoughts to be in tune, my actions to be in tune, and then I wanted every feeling of my heart to be in tune with Master. I wanted to be completely in tune. And this is what opened him to the grace of the divine that was flowing through and allowed him to do so much and to be so loved and so helpful and uplifting to people. So the first quality that I would think of when I would think of the time with Master, of Swamiji with Master, was his dedication and training as a disciple.
And I could interject here. There was a wonderful story that we learned about 2 years ago when we were in India, one that Swami had never told us about himself. This was told to us by a very dear old friend of Swami's, a man named Indu Ban, who actually sat on the Indian Supreme Court here in Delhi. And he and his family hosted Swami for when Swami first came to India, and let him stay in their home and so forth. But in this particular story, Swami this was, I think, about early 60s, around 1960 or something like that. Swami was in India. His guru, Yoganandaji, had already left the body. And Yogananda had given a technique of meditation that we teach through our classes. It's a technique of concentration called the Hong Saw technique. And so Swami had gone to visit another very well-respected Indian teacher, Swami Muktananda. And in the course of their discussion, Muktananda said, Hong Saw is not the right technique. It should be So Hum. This is the original. This is a much older in the older text. And Swami became very upset because he only went by what his guru said. And here this other very respected Indian teacher, saint, was saying that his guru was wrong. And he quickly kind of left. He was not in Delhi at the time. He got on the next plane he could, flew into Delhi, called Indu, and he said, Indu, I'm in a terrible dilemma. They said that Hong Saw is not the original. And Indu said, don't worry, Swamiji. I will take you to see my family guru, Narayan Swami. He's reputed to be one of the greatest Vedic scholars alive in India. He will settle this for you. And so Swami took a cab from the airport to Indu's house, and he sat in the taxi and he said, Indu, I'm not getting out of the taxi till this is resolved. And so Indu got in the car and they drove to this Narayan Swami's house. And Narayan Swami must have seen the anxiety in Swami about having this resolved. So he was playing with him a little bit. And he said, yes, we can straighten this out for you, but first we must take tea. And Swami was just sitting on pins and needles. Not that it was so important. Excuse me, I'm going to get a drink of this wonderful tea.
Nice to be back in the land of chai again.
And not that the mantra in and of itself was that important, but it was casting doubt on the authenticity of his guru's teachings. And so then Swami Narayan said, no, we will have dinner. And he kept dragging it out. Finally, when the dinner was done, and this Narayan Swami had thousands and thousands of texts on the ancient Vedic tradition and yoga, and he had a young helper with him, and it was said that he knew every line on every page in every one of those books. And so Narayan Swami finally said to a little helper, you see in the very end of the shelf on the left side, you go up 3 rows, that book with the red spine, take that out and open it to page 35, just like that. And then he read it, and it said, it was in Sanskrit, of course, but he read it and translated it for Swami. No, the more ancient version is Hong Saw. The newer adaptation of it is So Hum. And Swami said, thank you, you solved this for me. But that clinging with absolute conviction and to what his guru said, that was really what his whole life was. And everything he did was an expression of that total absorption in the teachings and the thoughts and the training that his guru gave him.
In fact, lest you think that only happened way back in time, we were with him, 5 years before his passing. So this would have been 2008 or so. And Swami loved to walk. Many of you have seen the beautiful gardens around his house at Ananda Village. And there were beautiful flowers, and we would go usually every afternoon around 5 o'clock. We would go and we would do just what we're doing now. We would have a cup of tea with Swamiji, and then he would go out, and even though his body was quite feeble by this time, he would take his exercise by going around the garden 3 or 4 times. And so I was walking with him, and Devi was just behind, and he was walking, and he paused, and he kind of looked up, and he said, "Oh, that's what he meant." And we said, "What, Swami?" He said, "I was remembering a time that I was with Master, and he was telling the person that I was with, my companion, another monk, he was telling him something. But as he told him something, he raised an eyebrow." And Swami remembered back 50 or 60 years earlier to that raising of the eyebrow, and he said, "Oh, that's what he meant. He was giving that instruction to me, not to that other monk." And so see how his mind was constantly dwelling on how can I be more in tune with my Master? So in memory and in thought and in action and in meditation, he was constantly offering himself to Master. So that has become part of the, I like to call it the DNA of Ananda that has been passed down from Swamiji to all of us, and that we too, Swami trained us this way. We too, especially if we're making an important decision, we always pray in a meeting before we try to make decisions, for attunement, for guidance, for the grace of the Master to guide what we're doing, so that we're in tune as we make these decisions. And so Swami trained us, above all, I would say, in discipleship. But I'm now going to let Devi pick another topic.
Well, I think one of the things that touched me most about Swami from the very early days that I began being in his training in his ashrams, this was a long time ago, back in 1969, but the thing that impressed me the most was so often spiritual teachers are very unapproachable, very detached, very, they're caught up in expanded awareness, and it seems like the troubles and the problems of ordinary human beings are just not that important. But Swami was so the opposite of that, and I think Master was as well, Yoganandaji was as well, that he was so concerned with helping everyone. And sometimes I would watch him, and people that nobody else could get along with, he would have them close to him. There was one man who was very undependable in the ashram, and he was in charge of managing a department, but he was unreliable, and he let people down at a very critical point. And we said to Swamiji, no one wants to work with him anymore because he's let everyone down. And Swami said, "Oh, really? Well, if no one else wants to work with him, then I'll work with him, and I'll hire him on my staff." And, it just was always challenging us to say, don't judge, don't reject, accept everyone, see the potential in everyone. And the just unwavering kindness to people he knew, people he didn't know. Once, when he was in the hospital, post-surgery, he had bad arthritis in his hips, and so he had to have artificial hips put in on both sides. But he was he was in this hospital room, and he was so beloved by so many people. Even though he had a private room, the room was just filled with flowers. They were just pouring out the door. We couldn't keep them all in the room. And then at a certain point, Swami said there were a few of us there, he said, I'm so fortunate that I have so many friends. And he had friends because he gave friendship. But he said, there are probably people in the hospital that don't have anyone, that don't have any flowers, or no one's visiting them. I want you all to take these flowers and go up and down the halls on all the floors of the hospital. And whenever you look into a room and you see someone alone or without, kind of looking lonely or unhappy, you go in there and you bring them the flowers and you talk to them. And it was such a beautiful time. We had so much fun. And the doctors and the nurses commented afterwards, they said, when they knew us from the Ananda community, they said, we love when people from Ananda come because it uplifts the consciousness of the whole hospital. But that was Swami's always giving, always concerned for who was lonely, who was unhappy. And I don't know if you have any stories about that.
Oh, there are so many stories about his friendship. There was a beautiful story that happened in India toward the end of his life. And it wasn't just that he was concerned for people who were associated with Ananda or that he had a relationship with. It was true for anybody. So this happened toward the end of his life, maybe 2-3 years before his passing. He had come from Italy to India, and the flight was a little bit difficult for him. And when he arrived, he was stiff and sore from the travel that he had to do. And so someone in the house where he was staying at that time said that there was a young man who comes to the house and does some massages, and perhaps you'd like a massage from this young man. Swami said, I think that would be a good idea. And so they called, and this young man came, and the man didn't have any massage table, so Swami had to lay on a bed, and the man gave him a very nice massage and was very helpful. But at the end of it, Swami said, you know, wouldn't it be easier for you, instead of having to lean down to a bed, wouldn't it be easier if you had a massage table? The young man said, well, yes, it would, but sir, they're very expensive and I can't afford one. And Swami said, let me buy one for you. Now this was a young man that he had just met. And so the young man said, well, sir, I think they're quite expensive. I think they may cost 12 or 15,000 rupees. And Swami said, that's all right. You find one and I'll buy it for you. And a couple of days later, he wanted another massage, so the young man came and Swami said, have you found a massage table? And the young man said, oh, I'm sorry, sir, but when I looked into it, they're even more expensive than I knew. It's 25,000 rupees. And Swami said, let me buy one for you. And the young man said, oh, no. He said, no. Swami said, no, I want to get you one. So you find one, and then you have the bill sent to me. And so the young man agreed that he would do that. But as he was leaving, he stopped, and he was weeping, not just because of Swami's generosity, but he talked with the person in the ashram there, and he said, I was an orphan as a child, and I grew up on the streets of Delhi, and I had nobody who cared for me. I had to look out for myself, and I felt not only, abandoned, but I felt unloved. And he said, I especially have always carried this deep desire in my heart to know the love of a father. And today, that hole in my heart has been filled by the kindness of Swamiji. I don't think Swamiji consciously knew that. He just saw somebody who needed consciousness uplifting, and he constantly wanted to give. It was a beautiful trait. So he really saw himself as the friend of everyone that he met.
Do you have another theme?
Okay, another theme. Let's see what's next. Creativity. Swami himself was constantly creating. He, as I said, he wrote over 450 pieces of music, 150 books. He created all of these communities, but But even sitting with him, having tea, he would, at a certain period in his life, he enjoyed drinking coffee. But it was dangerous to make a cup of coffee for him because he was constantly experimenting with new methods of making coffee. So one week it would be that you boil you chop up the beans and you boil them in a pot, and you bring the water to a boil, and then you strain that and you have a nice cup of coffee. A week later he'd say, I got this new method. So you make a concentrate of the coffee and you freeze that into an ice cube, a coffee cube. And then you take that and you put that in boiling water. And that freezing preserves the fresh. So at any rate, I won't go through all the methods because there are lots of them. But he was constantly being creative, even in little things. And he said that Master had no habits whatsoever. We think we can't get along with habits. But he said watching Master, he would even tie his shoes differently when he put them on from time to time. And so Swami was constantly creating, but he was creating also not just for the sake of creation, but also all of the creative flow was to move in an uplifted direction. And so he loved beauty. And so, as we were saying, he was constantly creating beauty around him in the gardens. He also loved chandeliers, because chandeliers, if you get them with the right light, they refract light in such a way that it creates rainbows. And that rainbow effect is more of an astral world than it is a physical world. In fact, Swami one time was sitting with a young man from Italy, and Swami said, you know, I live more in the astral world than I do in the physical world. And, you know, that kind of allegorical statement people might make, but this young man was German and quite literal, and he said, Swami, do you mean that literally? So right now as you sit, are you saying that you're more in the astral world than you are in the physical plane? And Swami said, yes. And so that consciousness of beauty, that consciousness of creativity, was not just for the sake of creativity. It was for the sake of lifting the consciousness so that beauty reminds one of the astral world. The astral world is closer because it's the world of energy. It's closer to the world of consciousness, and beyond consciousness is the consciousness of God. So everything Swami did, behind it all was consciousness. And what he did was to uplift consciousness.
I have to tell two stories that we could go on a long time.
Yeah,
because we keep reminding each other of stories. One about coffee and one about creativity and refinement. Some of you may have heard this story, but when I was quite new to the Ananda, to the spiritual path, and I was sort of in awe of Swami. It was before I really got to know how accessible he was and how loving and kind and accepting of people he was, and totally non-judgmental. But I thought, oh, anybody around him had to be perfect. You had to have the perfect consciousness and be perfectly efficient and know how to do everything.
She had probably been observing me. I'm not sure.
But so word came over that the person who usually brought Swami his mail, this was at Ananda Village, and there's one central mail room, and then people have to go to get their mail. But the person who usually brought Swami his mail wasn't available that day, and could I bring him his mail? And so, okay, I was a little scared to do this, but I got his mail and I just knocked on the door. He was, as always, writing. Oh, that's what he was always doing. It was in the afternoon. And then I was about to tiptoe out, and he said, oh, by the way, could you make me a cup of coffee? And then he just went back to his writing. Well, at the time, I didn't drink coffee, and I had no idea how to make it, but I didn't want to look totally inept. And so I said, yes, I'll make you some coffee. And I went into the kitchen, and I knew it had something to do with boiling water, but that's all I knew. So I put some water in a pot and turned on the stove, and it boiled and boiled. And I was just praying, Lord, let me either disappear or inspire me on how to make coffee. And this kept going on. And then finally, Swami, it was a long time, and finally Swami came back into the kitchen, and he saw me standing there looking very befuddled. And he said, don't you know how to make coffee? And I thought, okay, this is the moment of truth. He's going to just say, you know, maybe you should go somewhere else for people that are a little simpler like you. And, you know, I just was totally ready for, you know, kind of a put down. And he just looked at me, and I said, no, Swami, I don't know how to make coffee. And he looked at me. I was a young girl of 22. And he just started laughing and laughing. And he put his arm around my shoulder and patted me on the shoulder, just so, with such a fatherly love. And it really, from that moment, something inside me changed, because I knew you didn't have to be perfect for God to love you. You could just be yourself. And God loved you no matter how stupid you were, no matter how many mistakes you made. And it was a real turning point in my life, even though it sounds foolish. But, you know, we kind of are trained, both in school and in our families, to think, you know, if we're good and if we get good grades, then we're loved and we're appreciated. But God doesn't care. God loves us all. And Swami showed that. And then just a little bit about creativity and refinement. We just heard this story. We just returned from Assisi, Italy, as some of you know, where we had a wonderful Kriyaban retreat there, and people came from all over the world, really. And these two friends of ours, very fine devotee couple, said they were in a nice restaurant with Swami, and Swami's conversation was even on banal topics, just whatever it might be, books or movies or something. It was always uplifted, always refined. And this couple said they noticed there was a waiter who kept looking at them and looking at them. And then finally he came over and he just stood next to their table as they were eating. And then finally after a while, they kind of looked up and they said, can we help you? And he said, I've never heard such an uplifting conversation. And it wasn't about spiritual things. It wasn't about that, but it was just filled with higher consciousness and creative and fun and expansive. And Swami showed us how to live our lives that way. It doesn't always have to be about God per se, but if the divine vibration of joy and expansion and inclusiveness and love, that was the underlying tone of everything that he said.
I'll just add that, you know, sometimes people who are creative are in their own little bubble, and they don't care very much about whether somebody else is creative, or even worse, especially if they're a genius, they kind of put down other people's creativity as not being very good or very important. Swami was exactly the opposite. He always encouraged people to be creative, and to be creative not just specifically, but in general, to be creative in everything that they did. And so here he has written 150 books. You'd think, well, nobody else needs to write books. He was encouraging people to write books. He did all of these talks. He encouraged, there are so many teachers from Ananda that he trained personally and would help them, sometimes specifically. Sometimes he would, if actors were doing a play, he would go through the dialogue with them, word by word, to help them bring that to a kind of a fulfillment. So he was constantly encouraging all of us to be creative in everything that we do. And that again is part of the DNA of Ananda. And I must say that whenever Devi and I see anybody who's doing something creative, we always feel a sense that that creativity and beauty is a blessing to us. Just coming back to India, you guys do flowers better than anybody in the world. And just coming back, seeing the different flower arrangements and the petals in the bowl and all of that, it's so uplifting and so fulfilling. So if you're doing flowers, we thank you for it.
Share when you told Swami you were interested in painting.
Oh, as many of you know, I do some painting when I get some spare time, which I must say is less and less these days. So I haven't been painting very much. But when I started painting, I mentioned to Swami, and in fact, I did a little exercise. I was self-trained, and so when I was very much new and starting, I had a little book that gave exercises for here's how you do a rock with the shadowing of the rock and so on. And so I did an exercise, but I adapted it, speaking of creativity, so that instead of just rocks, it was rocks at Crystal Hermitage with the little chapel that Swamiji loved behind it. And it was just something that, an art student would do. But I happened to finish it, and I showed it to Swami. He said, "Oh, that's wonderful. May I have that?" And so obviously I was happy to give it to him. And then he had it framed, and that still hangs in the living room of his house in Assisi. And so he was encouraging me. It was not a very good painting, was not worthy of the other nice art that he had around, but it was an act of friendship, and he was encouraging me. And in fact, he said for me specifically that he said, "You're too mental. You're too logical. Doing something like painting will help you get more into an intuitive flow." And so he saw it not only as a hobby, but also as a way to advance spiritually. And he was constantly looking out for little things to help us and working with us in that way.
And then maybe the last point we'll touch on, because our time is coming to a close, is just his constant directing of our lives to find God. He made us believe that we could advance very far spiritually. We didn't see it in ourselves, but he would come into a room. There's a little mosquito trying to get at me. He would come into a room and he would say, "Hello, all you great souls." And we would look around to see who he was talking to, and he was talking to us. And so he helped us to believe in our own spiritual potential. And it was just as Lahiri Mahashaya said to Master's mother when she brought Master to her guru for his blessing, he said, your son will be a great spiritual engine that will bring many souls to God. Well, Swami too was a great spiritual engine, and he gave us the faith in ourselves in so many, many ways to continue the spiritual path, to not get discouraged, to not be overwhelmed by our shortcomings. We heard a wonderful story about Nayaswami Jaya, who many of you know, and this was told publicly, and Jaya told it publicly, so he's aware of it. But when he first came to Swami, taking some of his classes, Swami told the new students they should meditate for a half hour morning and evening. And then the next week, Jaya came back, and he said to Swami, and he was just beginning, this was 48 years ago or so, he said, "Swamiji, I can't meditate for a half hour." Swami said, "That's fine. Try 20 minutes. And Jaya said, "But Swami, I can't even meditate 20 minutes. And Swami said, "Well, meditate 15 minutes. And Jai started to say, and Swami said, how long can you meditate? And Jaya said, 5 minutes. And Swami said, fine. You meditate 5 minutes, morning and evening. And from that, the spiritual life was built, the foundation was laid, and now Jaya is helping many, many others on the path to God. But what that great spiritual dynamo of his soul moving towards freedom and helping all those who tuned into him to move in that same trajectory.
Now, I have in the back of my mind the thought that many of you hearing a story like that are thinking, oh, I wish Swami were here to guide me. Well, in fact, Swami is here to guide you. One, in a very practical way, that Swami gave thousands of lectures, and we have many of them either recorded on audio or recorded on video, and those are available. In fact, we're working now to make them more available, more easily searchable, and finding the talks that you might want. You might think that Swami was constantly coming up to people and say, oh, what are you doing now, and you should do this, and he didn't do that very much at all. He was impersonally personal. So he had all of the goodwill and the desire to help each one of us personally, but by and large, he did that through his lectures. And so in a lecture, he would answer people's questions that they were having, or he would give advice to people individually, but he would do it in such a way that often the person who needed that advice didn't know that it was for them. And so, when we have blind spots, they're really blind. And so when we have something that we need correction on, we're blind to the thought that we need correction. And so he might be giving a satsang, and he might say that, there are some people that they tend to be sarcastic with people, and it would be better not to use sarcasm because it draws the energy down. And there might be one person in that audience who was very sarcastic, and the other 49, and he's completely blind to the fact that Swami's talking to him. The other 49 people sitting there know, oh, Swami's talking to, Al over there, who's always putting people down with sarcasm. So Swami, the point here being that if you listen carefully to his talks, you will find out that he's talking to you personally.
Right now.
Right now.
Even though the talk may have been given 20 years ago.
Right.
Many people have told us a question will come in their mind, and they'll be listening to a Swami talk or reading one of his books, and that question is answered immediately. Because these great ones don't live in the same time space continuum that we live in. They're eternally present. And I think Swami found his liberation and resides in that cosmic consciousness with Master. So as we celebrate his anniversary of meeting, it wasn't really, in a way, it's a distortion of what really happened. It wasn't as though Swami traveled across the country from New York and met Master in Los Angeles. There were two souls, Master and his disciple, Swami Kriyananda. They'd been together in many lives, father and son. Swami remembered them very clearly. Master spoke of them. And it was as though the pairing, that meeting, was not for the first time, but it was a reawakening of a divine work that Master had Swami working with him in many other lifetimes. And so really what we're celebrating in Swami's spiritual anniversary, as we call it, September 12th, is that moment in time and beyond time when divine consciousness began to spread and be more dynamically present in the minds of truth seekers everywhere.
And so maybe one of the takeaways from this wonderful anniversary of Swami meeting Master is that in your own meditations, try to tune into these great souls and let their consciousness shape yours. Let their friendship fill your heart. Let their love not only fill you, but spread out from you to others, and feel that they are absolutely just as present now as they were that September day 69 years ago. God bless you.
Namaste.
Namaste.